I don't know how to begin this in a way that doesn't sound like I'm already losing my mind. But if you've ever lived in an old house, one that groans when it shouldn't, one where the air feels heavy even when the windows are open, you might understand. This is not a story I've told aloud to anyone yet. Writing it feels dangerous enough, like if I put too much of it down, I'll be acknowledging something that would prefer to remain hidden. But I have to write it, because I don't think I'm safe anymore. It began when I moved into the house. It wasn't even mine. My uncle, a man I barely knew in any meaningful way, passed away and left it to me. He'd lived alone for the last 15 years after my aunt left him. The official story was that she moved away and didn't want contact. But as I would later learn, that wasn't the full truth. The house sat at the edge of town, the kind of place people drive past without really looking at. 2 stories, dark wood siding, a roof that sagged on one end, and windows that reflected light strangely, as though they weren't made of glass, but of something thicker, heavier. The yard was overgrown, and the trees seemed to lean toward the house rather than away from it. I hadn't planned on moving in. My original thought was to clean it out, sell it, and take the money. But the second I stepped inside, I had a strange sense of obligation, as if the house expected me to stay. The air inside was stale and sour, a mix of dust and something faintly rotten, though I couldn't find the source. The floors creaked like brittle bones, and cobwebs clung in thick strands to the corners. But the thing I noticed most wasn't the smell or the dust. It was the silence. It wasn't a normal kind of silence. Not the peaceful quiet of an empty house, but something deeper. A silence that felt like it was listening. The attic door was the first thing that unsettled me. It was in the upstairs hallway ceiling, one of those pull-down, kind with a rope dangling. My uncle had nailed it shut, crudely, with rusted nails hammered in at odd angles. It wasn't locked. It wasn't bolted. It was nailed. I should have ignored it, but every time I passed it, I felt a faint draft like something was breathing against the wood. When I stood directly beneath it, I could swear the air smelled different, thicker like burned dust and old hair. The first night I stayed there, I dreamed of it. In the dream, I was lying in bed, and the sound of nails being pried loose echoed through the house. Slow, deliberate creaks. I remember staring at the ceiling, knowing what was happening before I even looked. The attic door was opening. Something was crouched above me, its shadow spilling across the walls. But when I tried to focus on it, all I saw were 2 points of faint light, like dull eyes reflecting in the dark. When I woke up, my chest was heavy, as though something had been pressing down on me. My ears were ringing. The attic door was still nailed shut, but the rope was swinging slightly, as if touched. I told myself it was just a dream. By the 3rd night, the smell had worsened. It wasn't rot. It was damp, musky, the way a place smells when an animal is hiding somewhere it shouldn't. I searched every corner, pulled out furniture, opened closets. Nothing. But when I stood beneath the attic door, the smell was overwhelming. I bought a hammer with the idea that I'd pull the nails free and see what was up there. But when I actually raised the hammer, my hand shook so badly I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to see. Not yet. That night, as I lay in bed, the smell grew stronger until I gagged. It felt like something was standing just outside my room, breathing. At 3:12 a.m., I heard the sound. It was faint, a dragging noise like fingers trailing slowly through dust. Then a soft thump, as though something shifted its weight. It came directly above me from the attic. I stayed awake until the sun rose, staring at the ceiling. On the fourth day, while clearing out the living room shelves, I found a photo tucked inside a book. It was of my uncle standing with my aunt. They weren't smiling. Their eyes looked strained, almost fearful. Behind them, in the corner of the photo, was the faint outline of the attic door. And something else. At first, I thought it was a shadow. But shadows don't have eyes. There was a shape in the dark corner, crouched low, its head tilted. Two faint circles of light reflected back at the camera. My uncle had nailed the attic shut for a reason. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Old houses creak. Dust plays tricks in the air. Photos warp over time. But that night, at exactly the same time, 3:12 a.m., I heard it again. The dragging. The thump. This time it didn't stop. It moved from one end of the attic to the other. Slow, uneven steps. Something heavy dragging itself. And then it spoke. At first, I thought it was wind, a trick of the house settling. But it was too clear. A whisper. Low, strained, coming through the wood and dust above me. I see you. I froze. My body locked tight, every muscle screaming to run, but unable to move. The voice was directly above my bed. And then silence. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I searched my uncle's study. I found dozens of old letters, receipts, scribbled notes, but one envelope was tucked deep in a drawer, sealed and addressed to no one. The handwriting was shaky. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, "Don't go in the attic. It knows when you look. The dust hides it, but the eyes never close." I couldn't get rid of it. I tried fire, salt, prayer. Nothing works. It follows. It waits. If you hear it move, don't answer. Don't ever answer. I dropped the letter, my hands trembling. That night, I didn't sleep at all. And at 3:12 a.m., I heard the nails shift. That was only the beginning. The nights grew worse after that. The sounds became clearer. Sometimes I'd hear scratching, as though long nails were tracing the ceiling. Sometimes I'd hear a low hum, a sound like breathing that wasn't quite human. But the worst part wasn't the sounds. It was the feeling, the sense that something knew I was listening, and that it wanted me to look. I wish I could say the attic incident ended with me brushing it off, but the truth is I couldn't stop thinking about those impressions in the dust. Rational explanations failed me. Mice? Too big. Squirrels? No nests, no droppings, no evidence. A person? Impossible. Nobody could have been hiding up there without me noticing before, and yet. The prints were there, and worse. Every time I closed my eyes that night, I saw them, the shallow grooves in the dust, like fingers dragging, and the faint, unmistakable circles pressed into the dirt like orbits where something had been crouching. Watching. It started 3 nights later. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke to a faint scritch, scritch, scritch above my head. At first, I thought it was branches scraping the roof in the wind, but then I remembered the attic floor sat between me and the shingles. The sound wasn't outside. It was directly above my bedroom. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, my pulse throbbing in my ears. The scratching wasn't random. It moved slowly from one end of the attic toward where my bed sat below. The dragging noise stopped right above me, and for a long minute there was silence, so heavy I swear I could hear the dust settling. Then came 3 sharp taps. Talp! Tap! Tap! Right above my head. I whispered aloud to myself, "Mice. Just mice." saying it made it sound ridiculous, but it was the only way to keep from panicking. I pulled the blanket tight under my chin, trying not to move. The next morning, I forced myself up into the attic again, this time armed with a flashlight and a broom. I scanned the floor, expecting droppings, nesting material, or at least the scurry of tiny creatures retreating into darkness. But there was nothing, just dust, beams, and that unsettling void of silence. Except now. The grooves I'd seen earlier looked deeper, wider, as if something had returned and pressed itself down in the exact same spot. I tried to shake it off. Paranormal explanations weren't in my nature. I grew up skeptical, dismissive of ghost stories. But a part of me wanted proof, if only so I could dismiss it. So I dug out an old Polaroid camera I had from college and climbed into the attic again one afternoon. The dust was still disturbed, like someone had recently knelt there. I crouched down, snapped a picture of the prints, and shook the photo until the image appeared. At first, it looked like nothing, just beams and dust motes frozen in the flash. But then I noticed something in the photo that hadn't been in the attic when I took it. In the corner of the frame, barely visible behind a support beam, was what looked like a face. Pale, out of focus, but undeniably there. Cheeks stretched wide in a grin that seemed too large for the blurred oval of its head. I dropped the photo as if it had burned me. When I picked it up again, I almost convinced myself it was just an artifact from the flash, maybe dust reflecting strangely. But the longer I stared, the less it looked like a trick. It looked like someone had been there, smiling. I didn't tell anyone about it. What would I even say? That my attic had ghosts with bad dental hygiene? No. Instead, I stuffed the Polaroid into a drawer and told myself I'd imagined it. But that night, the scratching returned. This time, it wasn't just scratching. As I lay awake, paralyzed by fear, I heard faint whispers trickling through the old air vent in the ceiling. My house doesn't have central air anymore. The ducts were long sealed, but sound still traveled oddly through them. At first, it was just soft hissing, like the wind. But then I swore I heard words. Down here, watching. Don't sleep. I sat up, every hair on my arm stiff, and shoved a pillow over my head. The whispers grew fainter, dissolving back into a dry hiss. By morning, I convinced myself again that it was my imagination, fed by stress and sleep deprivation. But deep down I knew something was wrong. It was a Sunday night when I discovered something that made my stomach drop. I'd been sitting on the couch, trying to distract myself with TV, when I heard a faint creak overhead. The attic door, the hatch in the hallway ceiling, was slightly ajar. I hadn't opened it since I'd taken the Polaroid. I know I hadn't. My chest tightened, and I grabbed the broom again like it was a weapon. The hatch dangled, the wooden ladder slightly lowered, as though someone had started climbing down and then stopped. I stood there for a full 5 minutes, broom clenched in my hands, waiting for movement. Nothing. No footsteps. No shifting shadows. Just silence pressing down from the attic above. Finally, with my pulse hammering in my ears, I stepped forward and pushed the hatch closed. I didn't dare go up there. Instead, I dragged my heaviest chair beneath it and wedged the backrest against the hatch to keep it shut. I tried to sleep on the couch that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the hatch opening slowly again, the ladder creaking under invisible weight, and something descending in silence. I lasted 4 days before I caved and told someone. My friend Mark came over after work. He's the kind of guy who laughs at ghost stories and prides himself on being practical. Perfect person to confirm I was just losing it. We pulled the chair away, opened the hatch, and climbed up together. Flashlights cut through the dimness. I showed him the disturbed dust. "Looks like raccoons," he said at first, crouching to run his hand through the grooves. "See, the lines here could be from claws dragging." But then he stopped talking. His flashlight beam froze on something in the far corner of the attic. Two small circles of reflected light. Eyes. They blinked. Mark cursed, scrambling backward, nearly falling down the ladder. I stood frozen, my beam locked on the corner where the eyes had been. But by the time I gathered the courage to step closer, the corner was empty. Just shadows and dust. "There is something up there," Mark hissed once we were safely back on the ground. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "Probably an animal. Raccoon. Possum." But I could tell from the way his hands trembled that he hadn't believed it either. And that night, when the scratching began again, I realized with cold certainty, whatever it wasn't leaving. I told myself I'd spend as little time in the house as possible. After that first night of scratching in the attic, after the sudden cold gust that made the light bulb sway, after I swore I'd seen something in the dust that shouldn't have been there, I had resolved to do the most rational thing: pretend it wasn't real. It was easier said than done. When I returned the following afternoon, sunlight spilling through the dirty curtains and cobwebbed windows, the house seemed harmless again. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, golden in the light. The warped wooden floor creaked the way any abandoned house would, not with malice, but with age. I reminded myself it was just a house, rotting wood, insulation, broken shingles, nothing else. I pushed myself to believe it. I forced a new rule into my head. I would not go near the attic again. The hatch would stay closed, the ladder tucked away, and I would focus only on what I needed, the renovation of the lower floors. That was all. Yet, as I began scraping old wallpaper from the walls in the living room, a thought kept pressing into me. Not a voice, not a sound, but a thought like someone else's idea being slipped into my own mind. "You left it open." Every scrape of the wallpaper blade seemed to echo it. "You left it open. You left it open." I paused, breathing heavily, sweat beading across my forehead, though the house was unnaturally cool. I told myself the attic hatch was shut. I had shut it. I had pulled the cord, and I had heard it click. Still, my hands trembled. I climbed the stairs. The upstairs hallway was long and crooked, slanting slightly to the left from the sinking foundation. The wallpaper here was yellowed and peeling in wide strips, revealing a gray underlayer speckled with mold. At the far end, the square attic hatch sat in the ceiling. I stared at it. The cord was hanging down. My chest locked tight. I knew I had pulled it flush the night before. I remembered the sound of the wood sealing against the frame. Now it dangled as if someone had tugged it loose. The hatch was open a hairline crack. Dust fluttered down. I stood there for what felt like hours, my pulse hammering in my temples. I wanted to slam it shut again, but my body wouldn't move forward. Instead, I backed away step by step until I was downstairs again, until I was in the living room, until I was outside the house breathing the clean air like I had just survived drowning. I locked the front door. Not that it mattered. For 3 nights, I didn't sleep in the house. I stayed at my apartment across town, but every night the same dream plagued me. I would be lying in bed, and I would hear faint footsteps above me. Not in the upstairs hallway, no, directly overhead, where there was no room except for an attic. The steps would creak slowly, deliberately, back and forth. Then a whisper, a scraping, something dragging itself across beams. And then, always, at the end, two eyes, glowing pale in the black, peering down at me from the ceiling corner where no person should have been able to fit. I woke up in sweat, my sheets twisted like ropes. By the fourth morning, I knew I couldn't ignore the house anymore. Something was waiting for me there, and avoiding it only made it follow me closer. When I returned that day, I noticed something new. The front door was already open. Not wide, not swinging, but unlatched ajar like someone had stepped inside and not bothered to shut it all the way. I froze on the porch. My hand hovered over the rusting doorknob. The neighborhood was abandoned, no one living within several blocks. Vandals might have broken in, I thought, but my gut told me otherwise. I pushed the door open. Inside, the smell hit me first. Not dust this time, but damp earth. Like soil after rain. Like graves. It seeped through the whole house, thick and wet, as though something underground had forced its way into the air. I whispered aloud, maybe to convince myself. There's no one here, but I didn't believe it. I checked every room, carrying a crowbar in my hand. The living room, empty. The kitchen, empty. The bathroom, tiles cracked, mildew climbing up the walls. Empty. When I reached the stairs, I paused. The air above seemed heavier, thicker. A subtle vibration hummed in the walls, like a low moan caught in the beams. I climbed anyway. The upstairs hallway stretched before me, dim light leaking in from a single narrow window. The attic hatch was wide open now, the ladder fully extended as though waiting. I gripped the crowbar tighter, and then I saw it. In the dust beneath the ladder, fresh footprints. Bare, small, as if a child had walked down recently. Each print smeared into the wood, as if something damp had pressed into it. The trail led down the hall, into the bedroom at the end. The same bedroom I had avoided opening since I first entered the house. The door was cracked. I pushed it open with a crowbar. The room was dark, the curtains pulled, but I could see shapes, an old bed frame with no mattress, a bureau tipped on its side, the skeleton of a chair in the corner. And then, on the floorboards, a mound. A pile of attic dust. But it wasn't still. It shifted, like something breathing beneath it. I felt the air catch in my throat. I wanted to run. Every nerve in my body screamed to turn back, to leave, to never come here again. But then, from beneath the mound of dust, came a sound. A giggle. High-pitched. Childlike. It crawled across the room and settled into my ears, sickly sweet and wrong. And I realized, with horror, that the dust wasn't piled naturally. It had been carried there, gathered there, as if whatever was in the attic had brought it down and laid in it like a nest. Something was hiding in the dust, watching me. I didn't remember leaving the house. One moment I was frozen in the doorway, crowbar trembling in my grip, that giggle still buzzing in the air. The next I was standing on the porch steps, the cold evening wind on my face, the door shut behind me. I don't know how I got outside. I don't want to know. What I do know is this. When I looked up at the second-story window of that bedroom, the curtain had been drawn aside, and behind the glass, pressed close, was a face. Not a child's, not anything human, just a pale oval with wide, unblinking eyes and lips stretched too far, too long, into a smile. The curtain closed again before I could breathe. That night, when I tried to sleep, my ceiling cracked. Dust rained down on my pillow, and in the silence of my apartment, I swear I heard the attic breathing. I don't think I've had a single uninterrupted night of sleep since the first time I climbed into that attic. The house has become a kind of living organism, breathing and shifting around me, and I feel myself trapped inside of it like something swallowed whole. I used to keep a flashlight at my bedside, ready to shine into the corners when the scratching woke me, but lately I don't bother anymore. I know what I'll find. Nothing. And yet, the sounds persist. The scratching has grown slower, more deliberate, like fingernails dragging along beams that were directly above my head. Sometimes I swear it syncs with my heartbeat. Other times it lags behind, like something trying to learn me, trying to imitate me. The strangest part is that the sounds aren't only in the attic anymore. 3 nights ago, as I lay awake listening, the noise shifted. It didn't come from above me. Instead, it traveled down the wall beside my bed. I pressed my palm against the wallpaper, the faded floral pattern rough beneath my skin, and felt the faintest tremor, like something was on the other side of the plaster, moving its hand or claw along the boards. I couldn't help myself. I whispered, "What do you want?" The scratching stopped immediately. Silence filled the room, the kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. I stayed frozen, hand against the wall, afraid to move. Then, right against the thin barrier separating me from whatever lingered there, I heard it tap. Tap! Tap! 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. And then, nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat upright in bed until the pale morning light made the wallpaper look less like peeling skin and more like what it was. I told myself I was imagining things. Sleep deprivation, stress, isolation, it could explain all of it. But 2 nights later, I saw it for the first time. I woke to the sound of laughter. Not loud, not shrill. A hushed, whispery laugh, like someone desperately trying to stifle it. It drifted down from the attic vent, floating through the slats. I grabbed the flashlight and aimed it upward. At first, I saw only dust drifting in the narrow beam. But then, behind the dust, something caught the light. 2 points, glinting. They weren't reflections off metal. No, these were wet organic. Eyes, wide open, staring down at me through the vent. I dropped the flashlight, and in the scramble to pick it back up, the beam shifted and the eyes were gone. The vent was empty again, but the laughter hadn't stopped. It echoed faintly as if the attic itself were muffling it, rolling it down the beams and into my room. I didn't bother trying to sleep after that. The next day, I decided to investigate again. Not at night, not alone in the dark. I climbed into the attic while the sun was still high, carrying the flashlight and a dust mask this time, just in case. The place looked the same as always. Cluttered boxes, sagging insulation, warped boards. But I forced myself to crawl deeper, all the way to the farthest corner, where the roof angled down so sharply I had to crouch on my elbows. That's when I found it. A leather-bound journal, its cover stiff and cracked with age, half buried under the dust and insulation. It had no name, no title, just a blackened scrawl of mildew on the front. I carried it down to my room, sat at my desk, and flipped it open. The handwriting was jagged, erratic, as though whoever wrote it had done so in frantic bursts. The entries were short, incomplete. Many were crossed out so hard the paper had torn. But one passage stood out. The thing in the attic doesn't breathe, but it watches. It knows my face now. It wears my face when the night is long enough. The words bled into me, chilling me more than the cold drafts that seeped through the windows at night. I flipped further, my hands trembling, and found another. I thought I buried it in dust, but dust cannot bury what was never alive. After that, the pages stopped making sense. Scribbles, shapes, frantic scratches like claws instead of a pen. I slammed the journal shut. The next incident shattered any remaining illusion that I was only dealing with noises and glimpses. I was brushing my teeth that night when I caught sight of movement in the bathroom mirror. At first, I assumed it was just me, the light flickering, maybe, but then I froze. My reflection hadn't moved. I had stopped brushing, but the reflection continued, its arm jerking up and down in sharp, unnatural strokes. Too fast, too mechanical. Then it stopped too, and smiled. The smile was wide, too wide, stretching past the limits of skin. Dust began to drift from the corners of its mouth, falling like tiny gray flakes onto the porcelain sink. I dropped the toothbrush. My knees nearly buckled as I stumbled backward, keeping my eyes on the mirror. The reflection tilted its head at me, not with curiosity, with recognition. And then, as though the dust it shed had choked it back into silence, the reflection returned to normal. Just me, terrified. I locked the bathroom door that night and slept on the floor, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing just outside, waiting for me to look again. It's not just the attic anymore, not just the walls. 2 nights ago, I heard the sound in my own room. Not footsteps, not scratching, crawling. Something dragged itself across my floorboards, slow and deliberate, circling my bed. I couldn't see it. The room was too dark, and my flashlight refused to turn on no matter how many times I pressed the switch. I held my breath, gripping the edges of my blanket, and listened as the thing made a full circle. Then it stopped at the foot of the bed. For what felt like hours, I waited paralyzed. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Finally, I risked it. I looked. There was nothing there. But in the morning, when sunlight spilled across the floor, I saw it. A handprint. Not in dirt, not in dust, wiped clean. A perfect 5-fingered outline where the dust had been disturbed. It was smaller than mine, childlike, but stretched far too long. Last night broke me. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. I woke again to the sound of the attic shifting. Not scratching this time. Not crawling. Whispering. I sat up, straining to listen, and realized the whispers weren't just random sounds. They were my name. Over and over, hissed through clenched teeth. Daniel. 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 I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the flashlight and stormed into the attic, coughing as the dust swirled around me. What do you want from me? I screamed, the words echoing off the beams. The whispers stopped instantly. And then, as the dust settled in the beam of my flashlight, I saw it. A face, not formed from flesh, but from the dust itself. It had no eyes, only hollows that seemed to pull the light inward. Its mouth was wide, the dust shifting to make it look like it was smiling. I stumbled back, nearly falling through the attic opening. But before I could climb down, the face moved. No, it lunged, scattering as if a gust of wind had blown through it. I ran from the attic and slammed the door. The dust followed. I don't think I'm alone in this house anymore. I don't think I ever was. The thing in the attic knows me now. It watches me through the walls, through the mirrors, through the dust that hangs in the air. And sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night, I don't just hear it anymore. I feel it. The weight of eyes pressing down on me, hidden in the dust, watching, waiting, and smiling. The last time I ever set foot in that house, the snow was falling in thick, silent drifts, muffling everything except the creaks of my boots on the ice. I told myself I was only going back to collect what little remained of my things, clothes, papers, my tools. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about any of that. It was about the attic. It had always been about the attic. By then, weeks of sleepless nights had ground me down into something barely human. Every mirror in my apartment had been covered, yet I could still feel the prickling sensation of eyes on the back of my neck. At work, I'd catch myself staring at reflections in computer screens, in darkened windows, in puddles on the street. Always that sense of something waiting, smiling, biding its time. The only way to end it, or so I believed, was to go back and face it where it all began. The house stood hunched under its snowy roof, as though even it was exhausted, leaning in on itself to survive another winter. When I stepped inside, the silence was oppressive, the air thick with dust and the faint smell of mold. Every corner seemed darker than it should have been, as if the shadows clung to the walls a fraction of a second longer than the light allowed. The attic door still loomed above the hallway, the ladder folded tight against the ceiling. Even before I pulled the cord, I knew that whatever had been crouching in the dust all this time was still there, waiting. The cord was stiff from cold, but it came down with a whispering squeak, and the ladder unfolded with that dry, skeletal groan I'd grown to dread. The draft from above spilled over me like a breath. It smelled of rot, but also something strangely sweet, like fruit left too long in the heat. Climbing the ladder this time felt like crawling into the mouth of something alive. I half expected the wood to splinter beneath me, to bite down and never let me back out. When I finally pushed my head up into the attic, the beam of my flashlight caught the familiar sight, the endless ocean of dust, the shrouded shapes of forgotten furniture, the rafters like crooked ribs overhead. But the dust wasn't untouched anymore. It was disturbed. Trails cut through it, narrow, dragging lines that led from the far corner toward the very place I was crouching. Like something had been crawling, or many things. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I almost pulled the ladder back up and ran, but the sound came again, the faint, skittering shuffle in the dark. Not ahead of me, not behind me, above me. Something shifted between the rafters. I turned the light upward, hand trembling so badly the beam shook. At first I thought it was dust catching in the air, glittering motes swirling like stars. But then the motes blinked. Dozens of eyes, small, round, wet and glistening, buried in the dust that clung to the beams, staring down at me. Not blinking in unison, but all at once aware of me. My scream never left my throat. They began to move, slowly at first, as if testing whether I would flee. A ripple of motion along the beams, like a cluster of pale, bony limbs stretching and retracting. The dust rained down in sheets as something vast shifted, crawling along the underside of the roof. And in the glow of my light, the smile appeared. It wasn't a mouth in the usual sense. It was a long tear in the dust itself, a jagged crack that stretched wide, teeth forming out of nothing but pale bone and shadow. It smiled, and every eye in the attic pulsed with recognition. "You came back," it rasped. Not aloud, but inside my head, in a voice like the scraping of nails and wood. I backed toward the ladder, but the dust beneath me stirred. Trails erupted around my boots, as if invisible fingers were combing through it, reaching for my ankles. The attic air grew heavier, the sweetness rotting into a stench that made me gag. You watched, the voice pressed. You always watched. Now it's our turn. Hands erupted from the dust. Small, white, jointed wrong, sprouting from the floorboards themselves. They clutched at me, not to drag me down, but to keep me still, to force me to look. Above me, the mass shifted lower, dangling from the beams. The eyes swayed, dripping a dark liquid that hissed where it struck the floor. That rictus smile widened, and with it came the sound of laughter, high-pitched, overlapping, like children's giggles echoing through a hollow pipe. The flashlight slipped from my hands, clattering into the dust. The beam rolled, and in its brief arc I saw the truth. They weren't just eyes. They were faces. Tiny, malformed, half-formed faces pressing out of the beams, out of the insulation, even out of the dust itself. Hundreds of them, all with that same impossible grin. Their mouths opened, but no sound came, not from them, at least. The laughter was from the thing above, using them as masks, as reflections. I tore myself free, stumbling onto the ladder. But the rungs weren't solid anymore. They flexed, bending like bone under my grip. The attic wasn't letting me leave. I see you in glass, in water, in shadows. The voice crooned, every syllable pressing against the inside of my skull. Everywhere you look, I am there. You can leave me here, but I will follow. Or you can stay. Join us. Add your face to the dust. My throat was raw, my chest heaving. What do you want from me? I shouted, though I knew the answer before it came. Witness, it whispered. You watched your life without living it. You watched others suffer, others grieve. You did nothing, always the observer, never the actor. Now you will be watched, forever. The faces in the dust shifted, and I recognized them, neighbors, co-workers, even strangers I'd passed on the street. People whose pain I'd seen but ignored. People I'd let vanish from my life without lifting a hand. Their mouths hung open in silent accusation. The dust beneath me surged upward in a wave, swallowing my legs to the knee. The attic wanted me, and part of me wanted to surrender, to let it take me, to end the fight. But something deep in my bones screamed to resist. I lunged for the fallen flashlight, its beam flickering weakly. Without thinking, I drove it into the wave of dust as if it were a weapon. The light burst, shattering the bulb, but in that moment of violence, the grip on me loosened. I fell. I hit the hallway floor with enough force to knock the breath from me. The attic door above yawned wide, dust spilling down like an hourglass. I scrambled up, slamming the ladder closed, tying the cord into knots so tight my hands bled. The house trembled, not from wind, not from settling wood, but from the thing above, raging at its prey, slipping away. I didn't stop. I ran, stumbling through the front door into the freezing night. The snow swallowed me, numbing my body even as my lungs tore for air. Behind me, the house stood silent again, its windows dark. Only the faintest trickle of dust leaked from the attic vent, vanishing into the snow. I never went back. The house still stands, though. I checked once, years later, from a distance. It looked dead, abandoned, but I know better. It's alive. It's patient. And it isn't confined to that attic anymore. Every night since, I see it. Not fully, never fully, but in glimpses. In the corner of a mirror when I pass by too quickly. In the reflection of my phone screen when it goes dark. In the window of the train, watching me from inside the glass. Always smiling. And the worst part isn't that it watches. It's that I'm beginning to smile back.